In this video, I'm going to use Metalogic's Essentials for Office 365 to create a backup of a SharePoint site hosted in Office 365. So in order to do this, I launch Essentials and click on the Backup tab, and next I browse down to the site I intend to backup in the Backup Navigator. So I'm going to browse down to this site here called Finance, which sits in the Meta1 site collection. So to create a backup, I simply right-click on the site and choose Create Backup, and this launches the Backup wizard. So initially I have to give the project a name. Once I've created the backup, all subsequent backups will be grouped under this project name, which sits in the Backup Navigator. So I'm going to call this Finance Backup. From here, I need to choose the scope of the backup. Now, because I've chosen the finance site in the Navigator, these fields here have already been pre-populated, but in a different example, you might wish to back up OneDrives or all mailboxes. You can also change the URL to a different site in this window here where it says source URL. However, I find it easier just to pick out the site in the Navigator. Next, we need to choose the backup options. So this is what we intend to back up. So we can choose whether or not to include subsites, permissions, list views, content. We can choose to include versions or only a set number of versions. There is an option here to delete from the source. This is grayed out. That's a setting we can ungray out, but it's grayed out just for safety really, because in a typical backup, you're not going to be deleting from the source. We can also apply filters, so we can filter out certain types of content from our backup, for example, certain file extensions, and we can also choose to send a notification to a user once the backup has taken place. In terms of the retention policy, this determines how long the backup is kept before it's deleted automatically by the system. So by default, these boxes are unchecked, but we could specify perhaps to keep full backups for 60 days and any subsequent incremental backups for 14 days before they're automatically deleted. And finally, we have the backup location. So there are essentially 4 places you can back up to. Firstly is the local disk the software is installed on. So this would back up to my local disk. You can also back up to a UNC path. So we can use // and point that to a file server. And there are also 2 cloud options. So the 2 cloud options we have available are Amazon S3 and Microsoft Azure. Azure, for example, in order to use this, you need to have an Azure account, and within that account, create a blob storage container. Once you've done that in Azure, it will provision you with a name and a key. Enter those in there, and then you can back up to Microsoft Azure. So for today's example, we'll simply back up to my local disk. Okay, so the final buttons we have here, we have generate script. This will generate a command line script, which is a way of carrying out the backup outside of the tool using a script. We can also schedule. So if I click on schedule, you'll note we can only schedule this backup to take place once only. The first time you create a backup, you only have the option to schedule it once only. Once you've created the backup, you can then schedule it to run on a recurring basis. So for today, rather than schedule, I'm going to choose local file share and back this up on my local disk and simply click finish, and that will commence the backup. Now the backup has taken place, we can look at the log, and this will show us if all the items were backed up successfully. So each individual item has a backup log entry, and we can double click on those to view more about them. This log we can also save. So if I just choose select all and click save as, with the option here to save as XML and also a CSV, which is useful if you want to do some post backup analysis in a spreadsheet. Now you'll notice on the right here in the Backup Navigator, the project name has appeared, and if I expand this out, we can see a clock icon with the date and time the backup took place and also the nature of the backup. So it says in there in brackets full. And if I expand this out, we can view the libraries lists, and if I double click on one of the libraries, you'll see the content appears in the main window here. So once the initial backup is created, if I right click on it and choose update, I now have the option to schedule recurring updates. So I could say I want to do a full update. Now when I click on schedule, you see we have the options to schedule this on a daily, weekly or monthly basis. So I can give it a name, choose daily, weekly or monthly, complete the wizard, and then that will set up a recurring task in Windows Task Scheduler to run the backup at that regular interval. So now that the backup has been created, I can drill down into one of the libraries and view the contents. And straight away, I can right click and choose open on one of the documents, and that will open the document on my local machine so I can review it and determine whether that's what I want to restore, if it's the correct document. From here I can also right click and choose restore, and this will restore the document to its original location. I can choose to restore all versions, a specific number of versions like perhaps the last 3. I can also choose whether or not to restore permissions. If the document has been deleted for a long time, perhaps you don't wish to restore permissions with it. There's also an option to defer required fields. Now this will restore the document even if it has missing metadata, you could say. So if the library it's come from now has additional fields which are compulsory and you choose to defer required fields, the document will be restored regardless of whether it has those fields or not. Within this view, I can also right click and copy. So I can copy this document and paste it elsewhere. So this came out of this documents library. I could go and paste it back into the confidential documents library instead, or indeed anywhere else within the tenant. And this will use the migration features of Metalogix Essentials to move that document back to a different location. From here we can also restore the contents of a library, or even go as far as restoring the contents of the site at the top there. So that is how to create a backup of a SharePoint site using Metalogix Essentials for Office 365.